Thank you. Thank you so much, Olafemi. That's an incredibly generous introduction. And that's the book. If you have an interest in 19th century British higher education, that's the book I would most recommend. So do go for that. Um, what I will do then, just to start, would it be if I try to share my screen so you can see the presentation? There we go. Being a little slow. There we go. Excellent. So hopefully you can all see that. So I'm speaking today on successful career planning for aspiring registrars. And I suppose I should say, hopefully, it's successful career planning, whatever role you would like to achieve. So I think I'm talking for about 45 minutes. I think I'll hopefully make sure that there are some time for people to ask me questions if you'd like to. So I'm going to start with, if we're talking about successful career planning, what is career planning? It seems good to try and define some of our terms. So a career, of course, starts with you and the various skills and attributes you will bring to your career. And that's important as a starting point because the person in charge of your career is you. You will need to interact with others. You will need to persuade others of the benefits of what you do and so on and so forth. But it starts with you, and you are the person who is ultimately in control of how your career develops. So when thinking about how your career develops and what you need to do, I think there are four basic things to think about. First of all, knowledge. So the first piece of this jigsaw puzzle is the stuff that you know, and you're going to need to know stuff, information and facts, processes, procedures, rules and regulations of all different sorts. So you need to make sure when you're developing your career that you have the knowledge that you need in order to undertake your role successfully. Second piece of this jigsaw puzzle, skills. So you need some sort of expertise, talents, abilities. This is basically how you're going to use your knowledge to execute a task. And you will need those skills and you will need to re-skill yourself as your career progresses. Technology is a wonderful example of where that's so true. Many of us might not have used various video conferencing tools 5 years ago even. So you will constantly need to re-skill yourself, and indeed you will constantly need to make sure you have the latest knowledge that you need to do your job. So when thinking about career planning, you need to think, do I know what I need to know to perform my job and to get to the next level? Do I have the right skills? Am I constantly making sure I've got the right skills to do my job and move to the next level? Third piece of this jigsaw puzzle, experience. So knowledge and skills can be theoretical. You apply those in actual experiences. And this becomes quite critical very often when applying for jobs, because people on interview panels, they'll want to know, yes, about your knowledge and skills, but they'll want to know what have you done with your knowledge and skills. So how have you used that in actual situations? And this is where you'll be able to talk about initiatives you've been involved in, maybe that you've driven, changes you've made in your team for the better, and so on and so forth. It's the experiences that can really help candidates stand out. And you need to search for those experiences. You might get them in your day job, but you also might need to look beyond your day job. Where can you volunteer? And so on and so forth. And then finally, the fourth piece of this jigsaw puzzle, which for me is the foundation of career planning, is behaviours. So this is how you act. It's the way in which you conduct yourself and the impact that that conduct has on other people. And behaviours are in part just innate. You will find you naturally react in particular ways in specific circumstances. But I still think you can learn behaviours, you can develop behaviours. So I think you can develop behaviours in the same way you can develop knowledge and skills, and you can develop different experiences. So I would say that's the foundation for career planning. It's understanding those four elements and how you develop them: knowledge, skills, experiences, and behaviours. I then suggest that there are some important questions that you would want to ask yourself as you think about developing a career and developing your plan for your career. And the first one is perhaps obvious, but it's, what do I want from my career? And I will stress, what do I want? So as in, what do you want? Your career is yours, and you need to reflect personally to decide what it is you want. And that might be that you want to reach the most senior levels in your profession, or it might be something else. And I don't make any sort of judgment about what the right answer is from your career, because it's ultimately a very personal, a very subjective question that you need to come up with your own answer to. But you do need to have some sense of what it is you want to achieve. If you're feeling that you need to aspire to higher level roles, are you sure that's what you want, or just what you feel you ought to be doing? So, first question, what do I want from my career? Second, how much time am I prepared to spend on my career? Being successful takes investment of time, and it's pretty rare that people who reach the higher levels of any profession have done that through sticking strictly to working hours. That is, I'm afraid, just the truth of it. You need to spend time on your career if you want to be successful. Now, I'm not advocating being a workaholic. I'm not advocating working every hour of every day, not taking leave and so on, because for different reasons, I think that's not very good either. But you need to recognise that investment in your career is one of the things you need to consider alongside how you spend other aspects of your time within your life more generally. I'll cover a little bit of that later on another slide as well. But first of all, you need to think, how much time am I actually prepared to spend on my career? Because you might think, I want to be a very high-flying registrar, but actually I don't want to spend very much time on it. And I'm afraid that is probably a recipe for frustration. And similarly, how much money? Things often do cost money. If you want to gain more qualifications, go on certain conferences, maybe take international opportunities. Some of that might be funded from within your institution or part funded, but sometimes you actually need just to invest money as well as time in your career. Next question. What opportunities am I missing? Now, what I mean by that one, it's a behaviour which is about searching out opportunities for development. So think through those four areas I was referencing: knowledge, skills, experience, and behaviours. Constantly scanning that and thinking, where could I develop my knowledge, where could I develop skills, is important. That's one of the things I mean here. But it's also about having an opportunity mindset, where you're very positively embracing opportunities that perhaps you didn't initially think would be right for you. But if you're opportunity minded, you will look at things and perhaps have a very more positive attitude towards them. And again, I'm going to talk a bit more about embracing opportunity. Next question. What is my story about my career? What do I mean by that? I think we all develop for ourselves sort of personal narratives about whether we're successful or not, whether we are enjoying our work or not, how we describe our career to other people. That can be fixed by an understanding of what we think a career ought to look like, rather than what we innately think we would like our career to be. So what's your story about your career? When you tell people, when they ask you what your job is, are you talking positively about where you are? Or are you thinking about the things that maybe aren't how you would like them to be? I suggest that good career planning involves, good career development involves thinking about the positives and working out how can I look at the positives of my career and build on those, not ignoring the things that haven't been the way you want them, but not allowing those things to become a dominant part of your narrative, which can sometimes be the case. And then finally, but certainly not least important, is when did I last get real joy from my work? Now, I suggest you ask that question for a range of reasons. In part, I think it's because it should direct you towards where you want to go. So, if you're getting joy from a particular part of your work, ask yourself, how can I do more of that? If you enjoy speaking at a conference like this, you might ask yourself, well, how can I do more of that? Where does that lead me? If it's something to do with systems, if it's working directly with students, whatever it might be, where are you getting joy from your work, and what can you do to do more of that? Another reason I suggest you ask that question is because I think sometimes we don't start from that point. We don't sort of think about work in the context of joy, of pleasure, of getting enjoyment from what we do. Sometimes careers, in some people's minds, can be rather dry things. Ultimately, this is what you will spend a lot of your time doing in your life, and you've only got one of those. So what gives you most joy from your work? How can you do more of that? So 6 really important career development questions. And they're not questions you ask yourself once and then think, right, I've got my answers now. There's the answers I've got to those 6 questions. Look, I've written them down even. You will need to return to them because your questions will change over time. You will find that over time, you will have different views. When you're young, you might have huge aspirations for your career. If you become a parent, you might think, actually, my priorities are a bit different. That may not happen. You may have all sorts of things happen in your life, is the basic point. The things you get joy from may change, and so on. So don't think of these as questions you ask yourself once and then you have your answer. They are questions that you will need to return to periodically, just to think through, well, where am I in my career? So that's what I think career planning is, what you bring to your career, and some important questions you will want to ask yourself and re-ask yourself. So what does a career look like? I think that's a really important question as well, because if you're going to plan your way through a career, what does a career look like? So I think sometimes people think a career looks a bit like that. It's a ladder. There are rungs on a ladder, and career planning is how do you move up the ladder? How do you get to that next rung? And structures in universities are hierarchical. So, there will be managers, there will be senior managers, there will be executives. And yes, those reporting lines seem quite linear. And they suggest that a career is similarly a linear thing. And the point of career planning is to work out how you move up that ladder. I don't think that's a very helpful model, because very few careers are like that. I do not think that's actually how most careers work. I think a better image for a career is that. It's like a playing frame. You will go up, you'll go across, you might go down a slide, you might spend a bit of time on a swing. It's left and right, it's up and down, it's different. So, a couple of things to take away from that. One, if you still have an inner child, I think you'll be more excited by that playing frame than you will the ladder. That just looks more interesting. It's also just a more accurate representation. Sometimes to move upwards, you need to move sideways. So maybe the thing that you need to do before you can move up is gain more experience, not at a higher level, at the same level. Perhaps in a different area, you're developing your skills, your knowledge, and so on. Those 4 important jigsaw pieces I talked about. To do that, sometimes you're moving sideways. So don't always be frustrated if you're thinking about your career and you're thinking, my next job is not a more senior job. Doesn't always need to be a more senior job. Career development is sometimes just about moving sideways. It's enjoying playing on that play frame. It's not about just moving up this simple linear ladder. So when trying to think, how am I going to navigate that? How am I going to go across that rocky little bridge? How am I going to go on the swing? How am I going to make sense of going down the slide and so forth? So 3 elements: plans for your career. So you do need to make plans, you need to be organised, and you need to think through what you would like your career to be. I've suggested some questions that will help you do that, and given you 4 elements, those 4 really important pieces of the jigsaw puzzle I think you need to put together. So that's what I would say is how you make plans for your career. The next thing that happens is there will be events and circumstances. There will be a lot of things that happen. Some of them might be within your control, and some of them might not be. So how are you going to respond? Because that is certain that there will be things you have not planned that come along and happen. Let's take this current situation. Who was expecting a global pandemic that would influence how we're living and working in each of our countries and how countries are relating to each other? Really good example of just an event and a circumstance. So how is that going to change what we need to do? So the way in which you respond, you've got your plans, events will come along. How do you respond? And I think the position you take is a lot to do with your behaviour. It's a lot to do with your attitudes, your outlook, your mindset. So how I would describe it is your behaviours in responding to circumstances and thinking about what that means for your career. And out of everything I've said so far, so thinking about those jigsaw puzzle pieces, knowledge, skills, experiences, and behaviours, when I'm thinking through what makes somebody really successful, what's marked them out, I think very rarely is it they know more than somebody else. You need to know enough, and sometimes somebody's knowledge is impressive. I wouldn't say that's often been, in a professional context, the thing that marks somebody out is why they've been successful. Similarly, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the skills they have. Skills are important. I'm not saying skills aren't important. I'm just saying it's rarely the thing that has marked them out. The thing that more often than not, for me, marks somebody out is their behaviour, their attitudes, the way in which they conduct themselves and the way in which they work with others. So what I suggest is really rather critical. It's your behaviour. That is much more than anything else, in my experience, what makes somebody successful in their career. So where I'm now going to focus for the remainder of my presentation is on that topic. What are the behaviours of successful aspiring registrars? Behaviours, as I've already said, are to some extent innate. They're things just the way you seem to naturally react. They're to do with your personality. But like skills and knowledge, I believe they can be learnt. You can develop them. So here are my top 10 behaviours for aspiring registrars if you would like to be successful. And I've touched on some of these already. But first of all, opportunities. I don't know if that little chat there means anything to you, but in the UK there's a very popular children's TV programme called Bob the Builder. And I've got him there because his little slogan is, "Yes, we can." And normally in these TV programmes there's some terrible disaster. Somebody comes along to Bob the Builder and they say, "Can you fix it?" And he says, "Yes, I can." That's the attitude you need to have for opportunity. Opportunities very rarely come along at a convenient time. More often than not, they are an inconvenient time. You don't feel quite ready. There's an opportunity to study for maybe a higher degree. but you're thinking, oh, shoot, you're a bit busy at work. Maybe you could be involved in an interesting project, but you've got those other priorities, and you think, I'd like to do that, but maybe next year. It's not quite right. Opportunities don't work like that, unfortunately. Opportunities come along according to their own time scale. So the thing to do with opportunities is have that opportunity mindset I referred to earlier, and always think through, what can I do to say yes to an opportunity? How can I be a yes we can? Of course, Barack Obama used that very much for his first presidential campaign. That yes we can. Be a yes we can person. Next behaviour. Positive behaviours. Now what do I mean by that? You might have interacted with colleagues, none of your current colleagues, I'm sure, who seem to carry a sort of a weight of misery around with them. People who always seem to find the negative, who always find the problem, the reason why something can't happen. And that is so draining, really draining, to be the person constantly pointing out problems, thinking why things can't happen. So a bit like that, yes, we can, taking opportunities when they're there, generally have these positive behaviours which enable you to be resilient, to be persistent, because it's by having optimism that you will overcome setbacks. So I'm basically saying, don't embrace whatever your personal misery is. You will find you will have setbacks. There will be things you do not like. People will treat you unfairly. Circumstances will not go your way. That will happen to all of us. What you mustn't do is allow that to cloud your thinking and your judgment. You must always have those positive behaviours so that you can move beyond that. Sometimes it means just you need to make peace with circumstances you don't like. Find a way to do that, otherwise you will really be dragged down. So next point, flexibility. You will find yourself addressing a whole variety of circumstances and events, even and perhaps especially unwelcome events. So don't have a fixed endpoint for your career. Think again about that model I was showing you. A career is not a ladder. It's more like this play set where you get to go up and down and left and right. So be flexible. Where you think you were going, maybe early in your career, might not be where you end up going. And that's not a bad thing. Circumstances change. Careers change. Massification, the growth of higher education, has made roles more specialised. And you will find over any long career that roles start to exist that weren't there when you started. So you can't build a career thinking, I want to do that, if the job didn't exist when you started. So there's more and more specialist roles, and you might find yourself actually changing direction. So be flexible. And as in that cartoon, one of my favourite cartoons that I like there, don't forever try to push against the door that you need to pull to open. Be flexible. Realise you have to change. So next one, control. And this is about managing personal frustrations. So you may have heard of this model about spheres of control, where there's a certain range of things you can control. They're up to you. And I would suggest behaviours is one of them. Things you can control, things you can influence, where you're persuading other people, maybe you have direct access to them to do that. And other things which are really beyond your influence. So maybe some high-level government policy, where the thing to do is perhaps you're following. You're paying attention, you're staying engaged, you're being aware, but you're following. Now, frustration creeps in if you mistake some circumstance for being in a different sphere of influence to one you would like it to be in. So, for example, if you feel unfairly treated by a colleague, you can influence them, but you can't control them. So if you try to control them, you will find that frustrating. Similarly, with all sorts of processes and procedures, work out where in that hierarchy they are so that you don't end up being frustrated. Frustration can lead to very negative performance. and I suppose obviously enough, negative performance is never going to be helpful for successful career planning. Professional development. You will get a lot from your job, but you need to look beyond your job to develop the skills, the experience, sorry, the skills and the knowledge, and sometimes to get the experience that you want. Sometimes that's best achieved through engagement in some voluntary activity within your institution or a sector-wide network, something like that. So do think, what is the professional development I want and need? You need to ask yourself reflective questions in order to know what sort of professional development you might need, in order to identify, what behaviours do I need to most develop. Maybe there's some behaviours I'm struggling with. So do focus on your professional development as an ongoing behaviour. Next, understand your profession. People who have this behaviour where they are looking at their profession, they're understanding how it's developing, will have a better idea of where they want to go. So I've already mentioned this idea that actually new types of role will be created during any reasonably long career. I can think back when I started in higher education administration, which is now about 22 years ago. Roles did not exist then, which exist now. There's people working in, for example, immigration regulations. Whole teams now work on student immigration and staff immigration. They didn't exist back then. Online learning and learning technologists as an area didn't really exist 22 years ago. Maybe to a very small extent, but not really. That's developed over this period. There will be roles which develop and roles which change. Understand your profession, because if you're working to an outdated model of what you think a career should be like, you're not going to be very successful in your career planning. So think about that. How do you develop a good understanding of your profession to help you in your career planning? And 7, reflection. I've mentioned reflection already. You can't do anything that I've already mentioned without trying to have a good understanding of who you are. To answer those career planning questions I suggested, you need to have an understanding of who you are. So do make sure you go through continuous self-assessment and reflection, going back to those questions and using various tools. There's a lot of self-reflection tools which you can use. Asking others to comment on your performance is also very helpful for reflection, but ultimately it has to be a self-reflection. You have to own that. Next, and this relates to what I was just saying there, get feedback. Make sure you have ways of getting feedback from others, people you trust, your manager, peers, maybe people from other institutions if you're engaged in networks, and so on. So being structured in asking for, receiving and considering feedback is a vital part of career planning. You need to know where you need to develop. Link that back to professional development as well. So your investment of time and maybe money for certain things needs to be well focused, because that's an important investment. To focus it, you need reflection and you need external input from other people. So we're getting to the end of the 10. Networking. Higher education is a well-networked business. There are people in your institution, people within your national higher education sector, people in the international higher education sector who you need to network with, because you will learn more about what's happening elsewhere. You will get more of an understanding about how the sector works, how your role fits in, and it's really critical to answer some of the other questions I've been posing. So a behaviour around understanding your profession. How are you going to understand your profession if you're not networking? So think about how you go about networking. How to successfully network is the topic of a whole talk in itself, of course. What I would just say at this point is, don't think about networking as just being gregarious and friendly with a lot of people. It's not that. You need to be able to talk and have conversations and be an engaging individual, but it's not the same as just trying to be friends with lots of people. It's about creating a network of like-minded professional colleagues who you can share ideas with, who you can seek feedback from, and you're to be supportive of each other. Some of that can be achieved through gaining positions in national networks and so on, so professional organisations. It can also, be achieved a bit more formally. Maybe, for example, you'd like to join a learning set. So I'm not sure if you'll be familiar with the concept of learning sets, but small groups of people doing similar roles in different institutions where you get together a couple of times a year and you talk through issues you're facing, circumstances you want advice on, and so on. So you might want to do it formally through something like a learning set, but do think about networking as an important part of how you're going to develop your career. And then my final point is a behaviour around achieving a balanced life. Now, I think there's a really important thing to understand about work-life balance, and it's first of all that I don't like the phrase work-life balance. So I think very often work-life balance is presented like that. So you might have seen an image like this in sort of training sessions or somewhere else before. Work-life balance, you literally have some scales. On one side you put work, on the other side you put life. You've got to make sure they weigh about the same, because if they're doing this or this, you're out of balance and it's unhelpful. I just don't think that is sufficiently nuanced, because ultimately work and life are much, much more complicated than that. You don't just have one circle called work and one circle called life. They mix and mingle, and it's also, work is part of life. You don't become a separate person and have two lives when you go to work. Go back to one of the things I was saying earlier in those questions about career planning. What's giving you joy? Don't trudge on needlessly at a job you don't like. If you don't like it, think about what you do like, and your career plan is, how do I move from this to something else I would enjoy more? So I would like to suggest a better mental image for work-life balance, something like this. It's much more complicated. It's thinking about, how am I keeping in balance my health, my family, my friends, hobbies I've got, all of these different things. There are various tasks you need to complete, work tasks and other. How am I going to maintain that network? So some of the behaviours I've listed all require their own time and effort, and they don't neatly fit into the work circle or the life circle. And of course, you can add many more circles onto that balance. So it's not simply about keeping two things in balance, it's about keeping a whole range of things in balance. So if you're just concentrating on your day job, day in, day out, and you're not networking, you're not thinking about your professional development, you're not reflecting, you're not doing anything else, your career is unlikely to be successful, even though you might think, but I'm working really hard every day, why am I not getting anywhere? It's because you haven't got balance. And equally, in terms of sort of just personal happiness, if you're spending all your time at work and not thinking about friends and families and hobbies, you're likely to have some sense of frustration. Even between friends and families and hobbies, you need to think about what the right balance is for you and your circumstances. So you need to have a balanced life, but I think achieving that is much more complex than just putting two circles on the scales of work and life and making sure they're in balance. So, summary there. My 10 tips for career planning are linked to that sense of behaviours, how are you going to develop those behaviours which will enable you to be successful? Saying yes to opportunities. Be yes we can. Persistence and resilience. Don't carry misery for things. Everybody has things that don't go the way they want them. I've certainly had things that haven't gone the way I want them. Don't let them drag you down. Don't polish them and look at them. That's not what you should do with misery. Don't do with that. Be optimistic, persistent, and resilient. Stay flexible. Change your plans. Go back to those questions. Think through, how am I going to work differently? So be flexible. Understand what you can control. Think about those spheres. What do I control? What do I influence? What am I just following? And don't get confused, because that will lead to confusion. And focus on what you can control. So the other flip side of that is make sure you are controlling what you can control. Give yourself a commitment to ongoing learning and professional development. Whatever stage of your career you're at, you will need to focus on professional development. Make sure you understand your profession, so you know the territory you're moving within. Reflect constantly, so you're understanding your performance and where to go. To do that reflection, have a structured way of getting feedback from other people. Network effectively inside and outside your university. That will help you with the reflection. It will help you understand your profession. It will help you understand what continuing professional development might be right for you. And then last but by no means least, keep all of that in balance. Without having some sense of balance, you will find yourself not able to operate effectively and happily. So achieve a balanced life, but that's much more than just two things called work and life, and keeping those two in balance. So that brings me to the end of my prepared comments, and I hope that that was useful to some of you. If I've caused you misery in my presentation, then take my advice and just let it go. But I hope I haven't. I'm not quite sure how much time we have, but I am really happy to try and address any questions people may have, and I'll stop sharing my screen now.